So if I was to describe this video really quickly, I would say this is a recreation of a Division 2 build that was a recreation of a Division 1 build. Now, congratulations if you haven't already clicked away and gone halfway through the video to basically look at the build that I'm talking about. So thank you for actually paying attention to what I'm saying. Now, real quickly, what this build is about. Cover to cover, or just cover-based combat in general. Now, obviously, cover to cover was a much bigger thing in Division 1. You know, there were a lot of bonuses, a lot of good perks and talents and stuff like that that actually enabled cover to cover in a very effective manner. And one of my complaints about Division 2 was just the cover to cover mechanics weren't as good or just didn't feel as innovative as Division 1 did. Now, some of you may remember this build, my Ninja Stinger cover rush build, which was the attempt to actually recreate a build similar to this. Now, what I ended up using was a lot of armor regen. You know, I tried explaining some of the talents, how the cover system in Division 2, you know, just really doesn't feel as detailed or as beneficial as Division 1 did. You know, I showed off, you know, some of the pieces of equipment you could use to enable some cover-to-cover mechanics like the Stinger LMG and the Ninja knee pads. And at first glance, you know, looking at the footage, this build is very similar to the Division 1's version. You know, it is very similar gameplay. I mean, you rush cover to cover, you know, getting armor, getting damage, and it's really easy to kind of just, you know, see these builds as being recreations of each other. And that's great. I mean, I do enjoy having a build that I liked and then being able to carry it over in some form or fashion. But the issue that I have is much like a lot of things that I have issues with in Division 2. In general, Division 2 feels at times cheap. You know, it feels like a lackluster imitation or, you know, kind of a fake and easy version. You know, one of the things that a lot of PvP players say is, you know, there's very little skill gap. And I think that this build kind of exemplifies the apparent lack of skill gap between the two games. Now, the thing that I loved about Division 1 was most of the abilities, most of the mechanics were in the hands of the player. Not everything. I mean, some of the stuff was rather easy, maybe even a little bit cheesy. You know, looking at something like Nomad, where you basically just got free life for doing nothing. Actually, you got free life for being shot. You know, I mean, you got defensive bonuses basically for being killed, and then you just came back to life. You know, stuff like that. You know, obviously there were some issues with different things in the game that I didn't quite find very skillful or very enjoyable. You know, there's just too easy sometimes for a lot of things. But the Division 2 definitely seemed to have won up Division 1 in that regards. I'm not saying that everything's, you know, completely worthless and just, you know, so easy that even, you know, a caveman can do it. But compared to Division 1, most of the mechanics in Division 2 just don't really have the level of player engagement or, you know, player timing that Division 1 did. And this is one of the things that a lot of players kind of didn't like about Division 2. Now, for the average player, I'm not going to say that cover in either game was a very active, you know, thing to participate in. You kind of entered cover and then you shot at the enemy and ducked behind cover whenever, you know, you were being shot at. Obviously, you know, a very simple mechanic. But what Division did was it actually allowed you to actively use cover on pretty much a regular basis through, you know, most missions. So now, many of you may remember a lot of these talents that you could actually select from your character. Obviously, critical save to give me increased resistance. I've got evasive action to reduce damage that I take while doing cover to cover. I've got tactical advance, which gives me increased damage while doing cover to cover. And then for my final one, I went with precision, which allows me to pulse a hostile whenever I get a headshot. Now, I probably should have went with steady hands, which reduces my recoil by 25% whenever I enter cover. That would have been, you know, kind of just the trifecta there of cover to cover based movement. But I really do like precision. I think it's, you know, just more beneficial for the build. You know, I'm not trying to actually just make a point, you know, point blank. I'm trying to actually just, you know, make a build that I was using that was enjoyable. So I just kind of cut out precision. But I mean, there's a bunch of other ones that you could have used. Some that are, you know, really good. Police up would have been one that I liked. You know, obviously, since I am using the turret, it would have given me back, or it would have had the potential to give me back more ammo whenever it got a kill. And it's not like a beast of a weapon, but it does get the occasional kill. Now, like I said, you know, it is kind of remarkable how similar these builds are at first glance. I mean, you know, obviously the whole mentality of them is to stay alive by using cover, get some bonuses while using cover to cover movement, and then as kind of a last resort, use your skills or other activatable abilities to stay alive. Now jumping into the actual build here, showing you the Division 1 version. This build, it may not be the exact things that you would have used, but I love Caduceus just because it pairs up very well with builds that are trying to get as much healing on them as possible and are kind of like a mixed bag. So if you're doing damage, you've got some toughness and you've got some skill power. It comes in really handy just because of that ability to heal whenever you get a crit. And of course, I'm using the house as my backup just because, if you played Division 1, the house. Now for my chest piece, I am using Barrett's Bulletproof. Obviously that has its own little perks and benefits there that you should probably already know about if you're familiar with the game. I am using the Tactical Mask with Refreshed on it. All healing is improved by 30% when in the last health segment. That was one of the more popular masks back in the day. Next, I've got the Short Bow Championship knee pads. Obviously, this one just reduces my grenade timer so that I can, throw it and it explodes almost instantly. And obviously, there's no real high-end knee pads that are worth anything in Division 1. My backpack does have Relentless on it, which gives me the ability for my skills to heal me for 5% of the damage that they do. So my turret is going to be healing me as it's shooting. Then I've got the Skull MC gloves, which gives me 16% increased damage when no other bonuses are active, at least no other set bonuses are active. And then I've got my Gunslinger holster, which has Nimble on it. Now, whenever I do a cover to cover, Nimble is going to heal me when I complete that cover. So it's basically going to give me 2% healing per meter run over 4 seconds in a cover to cover. So it's a really good talent to have. Now, since this isn't a full-blown skill build, my skills aren't really that powerful, but my turret does, deal enough damage, and my healing box does heal me enough, and it also, has the ability to revive me in case I need it. So, just combined with the little bit of skill power I have and the healing ability from the backpack, I think that those skills kind of match the build nicely. Now, my perspective on this whole thing, like I said, these builds are very similar on the surface. Obviously, you complete cover to cover to get bonus armor in Division 2. My main source of healing in Division 1 is from doing this cover to cover movement. Obviously, I'm getting large amounts of healing because of it. In Division 2, it's more of a bonus armor mechanic. So there is a slight difference, and some people may think it's just, not even really that important difference. But showing these two builds, comparing them together, considering they are so similar, does kind of highlight one of the, negatives of Division 2. It takes away the expectation of a player having skill and puts more, I guess, stress on just having things equipped. And what I mean by this is, in Division 1's version, I need to constantly be moving. I need to constantly place my skills in good spots. I need to constantly be shooting the enemy. I need to basically be aware of my surroundings and constantly be making these cover-to-cover moves. Otherwise, I'm going to get shit on. That's just what's going to happen. However, in Division 2's version, and this is largely in part just due to one stat, and that's the armor regen stat. Armor regen takes away a lot of the risk from this build. Armor regen makes it incredibly easy. It's no longer dependent on me to keep activating. Armor regen is just always on, and it's going to basically always give me 3% health per second. Or I think it's, depending on that build, I think it might be even like close to 4 or 5% armor regen, just with all the armor regen rolls on it, not to mention the armor regen percentage rolls. So combining all those things, it makes it a lot easier. And so this kind of takes away the player's responsibility to stay alive, and instead you're just getting this stuff and then getting additional stuff whenever you do go cover to cover. So in essence, this is basically like Nomad from Division 1 using Nimble. Now, I wouldn't really want to do that. I'd prefer to use, a real Nomad build. If I was going to use Nomad, I'd prefer a 6-piece. But again, this is the kind of cheese. Everyone said Nomad was cheese. It didn't really require much. But yet, in Division 2, a lot of those same players are the ones that use armor regen builds. They love their armor regen builds. And I kind of find a funny discrepancy there. Like, how can it be so cheese in Division 1, and yet in Division 2, it's like the thing that everyone has to have. I just don't get it. The PvP flip-flop just kind of amuses me. But anyway, this is what I was talking about with a lot of the understanding of how the game itself doesn't really require skill from the player as much as Division 1. Honestly, Division 2 is a good game. It's not as good, in my opinion, as Division 1. It's not as fun. It's not as interesting. But it is still a good game. Now, most of my arguments about disliking Division 2, at least my biggest arguments about disliking Division 2, are just the lack of player choice, the lack of player-driven, responsibility. This kind of highlights it with this build. Moving cover to cover is my responsibility, is my need to stay alive. In Division 2, it's more of just considered like a bonus. This is why I don't like cover to cover in Division 2 as much, because it really doesn't feel like the depth of gameplay is there in that regard. And one of the things that I find extremely funny about the whole situation with cover to cover between Division 1 and Division 2 is that from the devs' perspective, the devs hated Division 1, especially in the PvP aspect, because it was never intended to be a dancing shooter. And one of the reasons that they implemented, the armor kits, one of the reasons that they kind of slowed the movement down of characters and stuff like that and tried to implement, no running while reloading and stuff like that, was because they wanted to stop the wiggle, they wanted to stop the dancing, they wanted the game to focus more on being cover to cover or a cover-based shooter. Now, the thing that I find funny about this is that they wanted to implement more cover-to-cover based, mechanics in Division 2. They wanted to utilize cover more. They wanted, cover to take a bigger priority over just the simple dance mechanics that you found in Division 1. However, they have less investment into cover in general. Their talents are a lot weaker. The selection process for making a cover build is kind of like, why would I use that? It's a lot weaker than something else I could get that doesn't even involve cover. There's so many different talents in Division 2 that are better than anything that is cover based. And it just sounds funny because in Division 1, Nimble was one of the best talents to have on a high-end build. It was just a fantastic talent. And there were some other ones that were good before they started nerfing a bunch of things. So there were actually armor-based talents, so when you're in cover, you can get additional armor or take less damage. And when those, stats, when armor was actually good, those talents were good. But then, of course, they nerfed everything because of the, the mess that was PvP and stuff like that. So those talents ended up becoming useless. But this kind of highlights the difference. And I think it's very interesting to see that, they wanted more cover, and they wanted more cover to cover in Division 1. But they never got there. And a large part of it is because they kept nerfing everything that had to deal with cover in Division 1. So when they went into Division 2, they wanted to make all of the mechanics require the player to use cover. But they completely, ignored all the talents and reasons why you might actually want to use cover. So personally for me, if they really want to do cover, they really want to do cover to cover correctly, honestly, moving cover to cover, getting these bonuses, these short-term bonuses, should be the strongest buffs in the game. They should be the strongest talents in the game. Something like Adrenaline Rush and Intimidate, which, could be argued as a cover-based mechanic. Obviously, it applies regardless of if you're in cover or not. So that being one of the strongest talents, or at least talent combinations, and then me using it on a cover-to-cover build, and combining with the knee pads, just made it obviously extremely easy to get bonus armor. But I didn't need to use the cover-to-cover. I would get the bonus armor regardless. So from that aspect, I really think that if they want to actually focus on cover, if they actually want cover to play a vital role in the game, not only do they need to reconsider what they're actually using, but they need to drastically increase the power levels of using cover to cover. I'm not saying that you should be invincible and you should be bulletproof, but if you can't admit that the benefits of, just moving in PvP in general outside of cover are vastly superior to anything that involves cover to cover, I mean, you're just kidding yourself. And if you want to talk about the PvE world, look, most of those bonuses that you get from doing cover to cover, they're not really that powerful. I mean, no one is going to be, there's no team that is going to be using all cover to cover stuff. I mean, the talents that you can use for cover to cover or cover based, movement and stuff like that, they're completely overshadowed by a lot of the other stuff in the game. Why would I want to use leadership when I can just have tardigrade? There's other ones that are just much quicker, much easier, much more convenient. And not only just being convenient, but they're just stronger, period, point blank. And they're also just easier to maintain. And like tardigrade, you don't have to do anything. Somebody just gets their armor dropped, and all of a sudden they have bonus armor. That just gives bonus armor to everyone on your team, regardless of, what. You don't have to time anything. It just happens. So it's stuff like that in Division 2 that kind of annoys me, and that's kind of where I see a lot of the skill gap. It's just, instead of being a mechanic that the player has to trigger, that the player has to engage with, that the player has to actually, manipulate themselves, the game just gives it to them. Oh, your armor dropped, here's your bonus armor. Oh, you want to have some armor repair? Okay, we're just going to just constantly keep repairing your armor regardless of anything. Those issues annoy me because it really does take away from the diversity. Because look, when something is strong but incredibly easy, players are going to use it all the time. If something's strong but it's incredibly difficult to use, players aren't going to touch it. If something's weak but easy to use, players aren't going to touch it. If you combine strong and no-brainer, yeah, that's what's going to be abused. That's what's going to become meta. I mean, that's just the simplest way to explain it. And that's a lot what we see in Division 2 compared to Division 1. But anyway, thank you for watching this build video. I'll see you in the next one.
I'm impressed, Agent. Tricky assignment.